A mother tucked her daughters into bed, but when she entered their room the following morning, one of the girls was nowhere to be found. The authorities swiftly became involved in the investigation, recognizing that she had not willingly left the premises. Despite coming across some startling evidence, the quest for the truth extended over several years. Ultimately, detectives succeeded in uncovering the reality, and it was undeniably astonishing. Kirsten Hatfield was born in Midwest City, Oklahoma, on February 12, 1989. Following her father's departure after her birth, her mother Shannon relocated to her parents' home for support. With their help, Kirsten was raised until the age of 2 when they moved into their own residence. Shannon later remarried, giving birth to her second daughter, Faith. Despite the challenges of single motherhood, Kirsten assisted in caring for her younger sister, fostering independence and a strong bond between the siblings. The young girls shared a bedroom while their mother rested in the adjacent one. On the night of May 13, 1997, when Kirsten was 8 years old and her sister 3, Shannon prepared the girls for bed. Typically, she would regale them with a bedtime story, but this time Faith had already drifted off to dreamland, and Shannon didn't want to disturb her peaceful sleep. She bid her eldest daughter good night and retired to her own sleeping quarters, leaving the door to the girls' room slightly ajar as she did every night, just in case either of her precious daughters needed her. In the wee hours of the morning, around 3 a.m., Shannon was roused from her slumber by a noise emanating from her daughter's room. Assuming the girls had awoken, she made her way to their room. However, as she neared the corridor and approached the door to their bedroom, the noise abruptly ceased. Believing that her daughters had returned to their dreams, she opted not to disturb them and was about to head back to her own room. But before she could do so, something peculiar caught her attention. The door to the girls' room was shut tight. Although Shannon habitually left it slightly ajar, she speculated that one of the girls might have closed it, or perhaps she herself had forgotten to leave it open. Shannon cautiously pushed the door open, peeked inside but refrained from entering the room, then retired back to her own bed. The following morning, at approximately 6:30 a.m., Shannon went to rouse the girls. Upon entering their bedroom, she discovered that only her younger daughter, Faith, was nestled in her bed. Shannon gently woke her and inquired about Kirsten's whereabouts, but Faith was clueless. The distressed mother promptly scoured the entire house, but Kirsten was nowhere to be found. She ventured outside, then contacted all her friends whose children were friends with Kirsten, hoping that the girl had sought refuge with one of them, but they all denied seeing her. Subsequently, Shannon reached out to her father, who resided nearby. Her final glimmer of hope was that Kirsten had sought solace with him, but he too had not laid eyes on the missing girl. Realizing that Kirsten had vanished, he advised Shannon to alert the authorities and hasten to their residence. Shannon dialed 911, and within moments, officers arrived at the premises. Initially, the assumption was that the young girl might have been concealed within the confines of the house, or perhaps decided to take a leisurely stroll. In their serene town, the concept of a child being snatched from the safety of their own bedroom was unheard of, leaving the local authorities perplexed. However, as time progressed, the gravity of the situation became apparent. Upon meticulously examining Kirsten's room, they noticed the window slightly ajar, with traces of blood adorning the frame. Stepping outside, the officers meticulously combed the area surrounding the window. A short distance away, a piece of children's undergarment, tainted with blood, was discovered on the ground. Shannon was asked to verify if it belonged to her daughter, and she confirmed it. It became evident to the investigators that they were facing a kidnapping, prompting an immediate influx of additional officers to scour the vicinity behind and around the residence. The girl's mother recounted being roused from slumber at 3 a.m. by a noise, only to realize that at that very moment an unknown malefactor was likely spiriting Kirsten away. Despite an exhaustive search, no tangible leads emerged, leading the police to interrogate all inhabitants in the vicinity. Regrettably, No one reported witnessing or hearing anything untoward that fateful night. The sole clue that surfaced was a neighbor being roused by a barking dog around 3 a.m., coinciding with the time of the abduction. With no concrete leads in sight, investigators sought the expertise of a child psychologist to engage with Faith. Despite her tender age of 3, she disclosed having witnessed the abduction, repeatedly uttering the chilling phrase, "A man came and took my sister." This reiterated the fact that the girl did not leave of her own volition, yet provided no substantial leads to unmask the culprit or locate Kirsten. Detectives found themselves compelled to recommence the investigation from square one. Their initial suspicion pointed towards an individual well acquainted with Kirsten, as it appeared improbable for a stranger to snatch her from her own home without a single noise. Pursuing this line of thought, law enforcement unearthed the girl's mother's troubled past with narcotics. The sleuths contemplated the notion that the abduction could be linked to this. It was conceivable that the mother was indebted to certain unsavory characters in the criminal underworld, prompting them to seize her daughter as payment. The other possibility was even more unsettling. The authorities did not discount the idea of the mother willingly surrendering her daughter. This would elucidate why the abduction occurred with such stealth. They conversed with Shannon, who refuted any involvement. She professed to have abstained from illicit substances for an extended period and vehemently denied ever betraying her daughter. Detectives refrained from hastily absolving her of suspicion, yet they failed to unearth any evidence supporting the mother's complicity. Consequently, the police opted to solicit the public's aid, disseminating appeals through the media and urging individuals to divulge any pertinent information. Subsequently, the police department fielded numerous calls in the ensuing days, with detectives meticulously pursuing each lead. While most tips proved to be superficial and devoid of substantial details, investigators eventually stumbled upon disconcerting revelations. A woman contacted authorities, harboring suspicions about her partner's involvement in the abduction. His aggressive behavior, coupled with a chilling statement during a quarrel insinuating a parallel fate to Kirsten Hatfield if she defied him, raised red flags. As the police delved into this individual, they unearthed another unsettling detail: his acquaintance with Shannon's sibling, suggesting Kirsten might have been acquainted with him. Furthermore, the fact that the girls and their mother resided in a residence formerly owned by her brother led investigators to speculate that the suspect might have been well acquainted with the layout. The man possessed a background that brought him under the scrutiny of law enforcement, with ties to narcotics and even physical violence. All signs seemed to suggest a potential connection to the crime. Nevertheless, the man professed to have been at a tavern that evening. The authorities corroborated this claim, and multiple witnesses substantiated his alibi, situating him at the bar until approximately 4 a.m., ruling out the possibility of his involvement in the abduction. Subsequently, investigators pursued countless other leads, all of which led to dead ends. The investigation spanned several months, and with each passing day, the hope of locating Kirsten alive diminished. Her mother refused to sit idly by as the police repeatedly reached impasses. Since the early stages, she exhausted every effort to find her daughter. She granted interviews to local media outlets, distributed flyers, and even personally probed various suspects in her quest for the truth. Shannon encountered numerous obstacles. For example, she conceived the idea of approaching local businesses in the county, requesting them to display flyers about Kirsten in their offices, shops, and establishments. To her dismay, many declined, citing violations of company policies. She also endeavored to arrange a meeting with the state governor, but to no avail. Shannon also established a small hub with the aim of attracting volunteers to assist in Kirsten's case. Their primary focus was on disseminating flyers and interacting with the media, yet Shannon faced fresh challenges. Some volunteers embezzled funds, others falsified their efforts, and exploited the media to garner attention for themselves. Despite all setbacks, she persisted in her pursuit of the truth for numerous years. At a certain juncture, Shannon recognized that the current strategy was yielding no outcomes, prompting her to embark on a different path. She enrolled in university, obtained a degree in criminology, and transitioned into a role as a parole officer. Shannon embarked on this journey not only to track down her daughter's abductor, but also to shield others from potential threats posed by released criminals. She was convinced that the individual responsible for Kirsten's disappearance had a history of criminal activities. Despite her exhaustive research on violent offenders in her community and neighboring areas, she failed to uncover any leads related to her daughter's case. Eventually, Shannon came to terms with the grim possibility that Kirsten might no longer be alive, resigning herself to the fact that she may never find closure. However, she remained steadfast in her pursuit of the truth. Law enforcement periodically revisited the investigation, exploring new avenues, yet no breakthroughs emerged. Collaborating with the FBI, they even produced a composite sketch of Kirsten's potential appearance years after her abduction. Although most believed she was deceased, the absence of her remains prevented them from confirming this definitively. The case remained at a standstill for years until an unexpected development unfolded in 2014. A woman contacted the authorities with a peculiar account. Following her grandmother's passing, she stumbled upon a diary among her belongings. The diary contained a chilling confession from the woman's own son, admitting to the murder of Kirsten Hatfield. The level of detail provided in the diary left investigators with no doubts about its authenticity. According to the entries, the man had abducted Kirsten from her bedroom and transported her to a nearby town where he owned a residence. There, he subjected her to unspeakable atrocities before ultimately taking her life. The graphic account spanned multiple pages, shocking even seasoned detectives. Additionally, the diary mentioned the existence of a videotape documenting the entire ordeal. Upon questioning the woman's son, investigators were taken aback by his words. He denied any involvement in the crime, yet he was aware of the perpetrator because the unfortunate incident occurred in his former lover's residence. This left the authorities baffled, leading them to inquire about the location of the said house. Subsequently, detectives swiftly acquired a warrant and dispatched a team to meticulously scrutinize the premises. Their initial action entailed the application of luminol, a substance that illuminates upon contact with even the most minuscule traces of blood, regardless of whether it had been eradicated from the crime scene. When the forensic specialists executed this procedure, they were taken aback. One of them later expressed that the entire abode gleamed like a Christmas tree. The chemical unveiled that blood was virtually present, and most significantly, the blood-stain patterns corresponded precisely to the gruesome details of the murder delineated in the diary. The experts extracted floorboards, excised sections of wallpaper, and dispatched everything to the laboratory. Furthermore, they organized a team for excavations on the premises, with the hope of discovering the girl's remains. Additionally, the authorities discovered a container in the residence containing numerous video cassettes, prompting them to recollect the diary. They were aware that one of these tapes must contain footage of the victim being mistreated. Detectives meticulously scrutinized each tape, a process that consumed numerous hours. Nevertheless, none of the cassettes contained any content related to the murder. The excavations also failed to yield any outcomes. There were no remnants or any evidence in the soil on the premises. However, the investigators were confronted with an unforeseen turn of events. Specialists examining the remnants of the bloodstains in the residence deduced that the blood originated from an animal, not a human. This revelation left the police in utter disbelief, as they were convinced that they were finally on the brink of resolving Kirsten's case. Instead, the investigators encountered yet another misleading lead. The exact nature of this situation remains shrouded in mystery. It is possible that someone orchestrated a cruel prank on the authorities, or that the diary was written by an individual struggling with mental health issues who had seen news coverage of the girl's abduction and constructed a false narrative in their mind. Nonetheless, the detectives remained optimistic that the truth would eventually come to light. Unfortunately, no new leads materialized, and the case once again reached a stalemate. In the summer of 2015, a new detective by the name of Daryl Miller took over Kirsten's case and decided to launch a fresh investigation. After thoroughly reviewing all the existing documents and records, he stumbled upon something peculiar. To his amazement, Miller discovered that his predecessors had failed to examine crucial pieces of evidence: the blood on the windowsill in the victim's room and on her underwear. Despite being stored in the warehouse, these pieces of evidence had inexplicably never been sent to the lab for analysis. Miller took it upon himself to rectify this oversight and sent the evidence for testing. Before long, the lab informed him that both blood samples did not belong to Kirsten, but to an unknown male. This was a long-awaited breakthrough, but the detective was faced with a new challenge. The abductor's DNA sample was promptly uploaded to the Federal Bureau of Investigation database, but no matches were found. Miller remained unfazed by the possibility that the culprit had not been previously involved in any serious crimes, or that the incident predated the establishment of the database. Undeterred, he made the bold decision to gather DNA samples from all the men connected to the case since the abduction. The police meticulously compiled a list, tracked down each individual, and promptly dispatched their DNA to the lab for analysis. To everyone's surprise, each person willingly provided their samples without hesitation. This unexpected turn of events led the investigators to entertain the notion that the perpetrator might not have had any prior run-ins with the law. Despite this revelation, Miller patiently awaited the results until he received a call from the lab. The experts had completed the analysis of one of the samples and made a startling discovery. It was a perfect match to the blood found on the victim's windowsill and underwear. The culprit was identified as 56-year-old Anthony Palmer, a neighbor of the Hatfield family residing just across the street. Palmer was among the first individuals the police had spoken to on the day of the abduction, claiming he was awakened by his barking dog around 3 a.m. With confirmation of his involvement, detectives decided to approach him once more. While the DNA evidence was compelling enough for a conviction, investigators sought to elicit a confession from Palmer. Not only would this expedite the legal proceedings significantly, but it was also crucial in locating Kirsten's remains, as only he knew their whereabouts. Proceeding with caution, the detectives invited Anthony for questioning under the guise of a routine process, claiming they were re-interviewing all individuals, including neighbors, in the hopes of uncovering new leads. In reality, their objective was clear: to coax him into revealing whether he had ever set foot inside the Hatfield family residence. Initially, they inquired if he recalled any additional details from that fateful night. Palmer reiterated the same account as he had 18 years prior, but this time he disclosed a new piece of information: the sighting of a white car parked outside Kirsten's home, a detail he had previously omitted. Following that, the authorities inquired about his acquaintance with the young lady and her family. Anthony mentioned that he recognized them as neighbors, but never engaged with Kirsten personally. He elaborated that during that period he had good relationships with other children in the neighborhood. For example, they would sometimes request his help in fixing their bicycles or drop by for some sweets. Subsequently, the authorities questioned whether he had ever been inside Kirsten's residence. Possibly her mother had sought his assistance, or he had visited for a casual chat. However, Anthony insisted that he had never entered the house while the family resided there. This moment marked a pivotal point in the interrogation for the detectives. With the discovery of the man's blood on the windowsill in the victim's room, they had caught him in a falsehood. This revelation would prevent him from claiming in court that the blood was left there under different circumstances, such as during a visit to the neighbors on another occasion. However, a dilemma arose. The house where Kirsten lived had previously been owned by Anthony's acquaintance, and he confessed to visiting it during those years. Yet, the fresh blood sample on the windowsill could not have been left there many years ago. Despite this, the detectives decided to proceed to the crucial part and informed him that his blood was found in Kirsten's room and on her undergarments. Anthony vehemently denied these allegations, reiterating that he had never set foot inside their residence. The investigators attempted to elicit a confession, but he remained steadfast in his denial. Subsequently, they chose to alter their approach and exited the room. Detective Miller took over the conversation with Anthony, presenting a photograph of Kirsten and placing it on the table in front of the suspect. Anthony promptly pushed it away and avoided looking at the image for the remainder of the discussion. Miller posed various inquiries, hoping that Anthony would eventually slip up, yet he continued to refute all accusations. Recognizing that they would not obtain a confession, the authorities concluded the interrogation and proceeded to arrest him. Following this, a search warrant was obtained for his residence, where a thorough excavation was conducted, yet no trace of the girl's remains or any other evidence was found. Anthony persisted in denying his involvement during the trial, but the undeniable results of the DNA analysis spoke volumes. Additional details emerged in court, revealing Anthony's troubling past encounters with the law. It was uncovered that he had a history of criminal behavior, including a prior assault on another girl and a weapon-related attack that led to imprisonment in the 80s. Despite his dangerous criminal background, his past convictions were inexplicably overlooked in 1997. In late 2017, the jury delivered a guilty verdict for Kirsten's abduction and murder, sentencing Anthony to life behind bars. Throughout the trial, he remained silent about the location of the victim's body, leaving the police with little hope of ever finding her. The challenge lies in Anthony's familiarity with remote areas due to his employment with the Park Services, where he could have concealed the body beyond reach. Despite this, Kirsten's mother persisted in her quest to locate her daughter, regularly reaching out to Anthony in prison in search of closure. Each interaction brought her closer to the truth, yet the elusive disclosure of the body's whereabouts never materialized. Tragically, in early 2019, Anthony met his demise at the hands of a fellow inmate driven by personal vendetta over his heinous crime against a child. Now, the Kirsten family's only glimmer of hope lies in the possibility that hunters or travelers may chance upon the girl's remains in the vast expanse of remote national parks.
Peterborough is a well-known cathedral city with a Gothic facade located in Cambridgeshire, England, sitting on the banks of the Nene River. This city has a rich history that goes back to the 13th century. This is where this sad tale took place. Ricky Neve was born on March 4th, 1988, in Peterborough, England, to parents Trevor Harvey and Ruth Neve. The couple separated when Ricky was just 3 years old. Trevor had very little involvement in his child's life after the divorce. Ruth went on to marry a man named Dean Neve, who then officially adopted Ricky, thus changing his name to Ricky Neve. However, the marriage was not smooth, and Dean rarely stayed at home. In 1994, 6-year-old Ricky was living with his mother and 2 younger sisters, Rochelle and Sheridan. By many accounts, the home was unfit for young children. Allegedly, Ruth was extremely abusive toward her children, which included physical beatings and starvation. Social services were regular visitors to that home and previously placed Ricky's 8-year-old big sister, Rebecca, up for adoption. Ricky was also put on the at-risk register, but was, for some reason, allowed to stay with his mother. Ruth herself grew up in an abusive home and then in foster care for most of her childhood. At a very young age, she developed an addiction to drugs, which continued for most of her adult life. Although Ruth blamed Ricky for her husband's absence and punished him harshly on many occasions, Ricky never lost his caring side. He would bathe, feed, and take care of his younger sisters when their mother neglected them. Despite all of the hardships, Ricky was growing up to be a bright, emphatic, and caring person. That is until his life was tragically cut short at the tender age of 6. On November 28, 1994, around 9:30 a.m., he left his home on the Welland Estate in Peterborough and headed for school. He was never seen alive again. When the young boy failed to return home from school that fateful day, Ruth called 999 around 6 p.m. to report her son missing. Sadly, the next day, Ricky's nude body was discovered in a wooded area on the fringe of the estate, just 5 minutes away from his home. It was a place where he often came to play with his friends. His body was posed in the shape of a star. He was laying on his back, his arms were outstretched, and his legs were spread wide. The position of his limbs was eerily symmetrical, leading investigators to believe it was some kind of sacrifice or ritual killing. There was no sign of his clothing, but a single small white shirt button was laying just 18 inches away from his left hand. Ligature marks on the front of his neck were seemingly caused by the zipper on his coat, which indicated that the attack was most likely launched from behind and the weapon had been his own coat. The post-mortem report of Ricky showed he was indeed strangled to death. On November 29, 1994, Ricky's clothes were found in a trash bin 150 yards from the murder scene. There, police found his school uniform, which included a white shirt, a blue coat, and gray trousers. 3 top buttons from the shirt were missing. His black school shoes were also there, with their laces still tied. The mud on his shoes indicated that he had walked into the woods and never came out again. In the right-hand pocket of the jacket were 2 small plastic toys and some guards. With her prolonged history of abuse, Ruth stood out as a prime suspect in her son's murder investigation. Although no physical evidence connected Ruth to the crime discovered at the crime scene, authorities found some questionable items in the house. They found several books on the occult, magic, and even devil worship. Additionally, they found a book containing a picture of the famous drawing of Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. Investigators at the time believed that, in one of its forms, the posture in the picture resembled the pose in which Ricky's naked body was found. They speculated that Ruth had probably killed her son as a sacrifice to win back her husband. Without any other suspects in sight, in 1995, police arrested Ruth on suspicion of killing her own son. Ruth repeatedly denied the accusations, but nobody paid heed to her words. On January 9, 1995, Ruth was arrested on the charge of killing her own 6-year-old son. Her trial began in October 1996. This case garnered massive attention from the media in the UK. After all, it was a heinous crime allegedly committed by a mother upon her own flesh and blood, the ultimate sin that a mother can commit. Media had already branded her as evil, and it was obvious whom the public considered responsible for the murder, and they were desperate to see her punished. Still, there was no physical evidence that put her at the scene of the crime. Despite this, the prosecution tried to show her as an abusive mother who sacrificed her son to fulfill her sick desires. The defense tried their best to focus on the physical evidence. During the trial, police officer Robert McNeil testified that on the day Ricky was reported missing, he searched the area but did not find Ricky's body. He believed Ricky was killed in another location and later moved to where his body was eventually found. This meant that Ruth would have been with the police when the moving of the body had to have occurred. The judge told the jury that if they believed the officer, they had to believe Ruth was innocent because the timeline did not add up if the 2 theories were combined. After hearing all the evidence, a jury at the Northampton Crown Court acquitted Ruth Neve of murdering her son Ricky. She did, however, plead guilty to child cruelty charges and was sentenced to 7 years of imprisonment. She was released from prison in 2000. From the start, she has always maintained that she was coerced into pleading guilty. Whatever the truth was, as time passed without any leads to chase, Ricky Neve's murder case would lay dormant for years. After being released from prison, Ruth moved to Cambridgeshire. There, she met a man named Gary Roger, whom she later married. Her 2 younger children were taken from her custody after her conviction and later adopted by 2 separate families. They had little to no contact with Ruth afterward. In 2014, Ruth started campaigning to reopen the case and urged authorities to find her son's killer. Eventually, detectives decided to review the case, which has been regarded as one of the most high-profile cold cases in the UK. The Cambridgeshire Police Department was determined to review all the evidence available from the original investigation in the hopes of finding new clues. Considering new enhanced forensic developments, detectives found that the trash bin where Ricky's clothes were discovered had never been tested for additional evidence, and was not even preserved for later use. However, DNA samples were collected from items of clothing in 1994, but the technology was not sufficiently advanced to provide a DNA match. That DNA was sent to the forensic lab to be reanalyzed using modern techniques. When the results came back, there was a match. They finally had a new suspect, James Watson. The DNA was present in the database because of an arson attack at a British transport police station in 2008. In fact, he was a serial offender who often committed crimes for the thrill of it. Unbelievably, James Watson had been questioned during the initial investigation as a witness, after another eyewitness gave information about seeing Watson with Ricky. During questioning, the then 13-year-old Watson stated that on the day Ricky went missing, he saw Ricky around the middle of the day. He claimed that he had skipped school that day to visit his father, and despite not knowing Ricky, he had a brief exchange with him when little Ricky made the offhanded comment, "That's a big tractor, isn't it?" To which Watson replied, "That's not a tractor, that's a digger." However, he claimed to have never seen the boy again. Notably, in this whole ordeal, he never mentioned having physical contact with the 6-year-old schoolboy on the day of his disappearance. James Watson was born on April 1st, 1981, in Welland Estate, England. Due to his unstable home condition, he was sent to a children's home early on in life. His father, James Watson Sr., was arrested and imprisoned for some unspecified charges. Watson never got along with his father anyway, due to the constant abuse he received from him. He was doing well in the care of his foster mother until she got scared after seeing a shotgun in his hand. Realizing that Watson was too much to handle, she arranged to send him away to Woodgate's Children's Home, just 20 miles from Peterborough. By 1993, social services regarded him as a vulnerable child. That same year, he was accused of touching a 5-year-old boy inappropriately, but denied the allegations, and no further action was taken. In 1994, 13-year-old Watson was still living in Woodgate Children's Home near Ricky's house. In the coming years, he would rack up a lengthy list of strange behaviors and run-ins with authorities throughout his childhood and into adulthood. At the age of 13, he fantasized about strangling a kid and even informed his mother he had heard a news report on the radio about a boy being found strangled. This was just a few days prior to Ricky's murder. His mother simply said she hadn't heard about it and dismissed the incident. In January 1995, while at the children's home, Watson stole track signal detonators that give off a loud noise and laid them on a railway line. Watson later explained how much fun he had doing it, citing that he was delighted in the notoriety. In August 2005, he stole police uniforms, important police equipment, and car keys from a police station and left them in a car. When asked to explain the reasoning, he said that a majority of his crimes had been to get arrested when his life was not going as planned. Then 4 years later, in January 2009, Watson again broke into a British transport police station and stole some items. He then set fire to the property store before absconding on a bicycle. Over the years, Watson had been responsible for countless burglaries, theft, and other criminal activities. But the string of offenses doesn't just end with stealing, burglarizing, or even arson attacks. Deep inside, Watson possessed 6 sexual desires which would showcase their symptoms from an early age. Watson's former girlfriend met him when he was just 15. Despite Watson identifying as gay, he formed a relationship with her. She described her horrible experience with him, saying that he used to bring a survival kit, which included a knife when they went into the woods for sex. She added that towards the end, he would firmly hold her neck and try to choke her during intercourse, leaving marks on her throat. He became more and more forceful as time went on, almost reaching the point of strangulation. The manager of the children's home where Watson was living between 1994 and 1995 found catalog magazines under his bed that had pictures of babies and toddlers, mostly wearing underwear. He also possessed an unhealthy interest in animals, which often resulted in the death of poor creatures. Despite having such a troublesome past in all those years, authorities never set their focus on James Watson as a possible suspect for Ricky's murder until DNA evidence pointed to him. When detectives confronted Watson about the DNA on Ricky's clothes, he tried to explain the situation, saying he had picked Ricky up to help him see over a wooden fence at some diggers on a construction site, a detail that he conveniently forgot to mention in his original statement in 1994. However, investigators found that the fence was built years later and had not been there during the time of Ricky Neve's murder, further implicating Watson with his own lies. Although this is the evidence that, along with DNA, ultimately sealed his fate, investigators started putting other pieces together to build a strong case. They found that after Ricky's murder, Watson kept newspaper clippings about the case and made numerous copies of them, probably fascinated and excited by his own actions. In April 2016, James Watson was arrested on the suspicion of murder. He was later released on police bail and was sent to a bail hostel, which is an approved premises run by probation or volunteer services. He left the UK with a bail hostel companion to escape justice. He first traveled to Rotterdam, then France, and over the Pyrenees to Portugal. During this time, there are multiple pictures of him lounging on the beach, seemingly without a care in the world. From France, he contacted his sister, who contacted the authorities. Eventually, he was arrested near the British Embassy in Lisbon. His trial began in January 2022 and lasted 11 weeks. During the trial, a heap of evidence was presented to the jury. The DNA evidence, his constant lies, the copied newspaper clippings, mud on the shoe, all pointing towards Watson. It was also argued by the prosecution that undigested food in Ricky's stomach suggested that he had been murdered within 2 hours of leaving home, around the time when the witness had seen Watson with Ricky. Finally, the jury found James Watson guilty of the murder of Ricky Neve, ending a 27-year mystery after 36 hours of deliberation. In late June 2022, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 15 years. The sentence reflected the fact that he was only 13 years of age when he committed the heinous crime. Ricky's mom, Ruth, has branded him pure evil, describing how the young boy's murder tore her family apart. Ricky's sister, Rochelle, said that the verdict was a victory and justice had finally been served after years. She was the one who successfully challenged the decision when prosecutors felt there was insufficient evidence to prosecute. She was part of a victim's right to review to get the decision reversed. Although in the end, justice was served, the case is tragic in so many ways. A sweet young boy with a cheeky smile was brutally murdered by another child after suffering years of abuse at the hands of his own mother. The social services failed both boys. Everyone failed them. We can only find solace in the fact that James Watson will no longer be able to hurt anyone else. Our only comfort lies in knowing that James Watson will never again have the opportunity to cause harm to another soul.